Obscure City is a place where you can find many unique dangers. This is where she works, Cassandra Killjoy, paranormal private eye. Now a teenage girl's father has gone missing, and Killjoy believes that the city's enigmatic protector, the Swordsman, is the key to finding heaven. So Killjoy must face many deadly dangers in her search for the Swordsman. Available on Amazon.com. Everybody knows the story of the brave band of rebels who defeated the all-powerful Empire and ushered in an era of peace for the entire galaxy. But it is time that you hear the story of the rebels behind the rebels. Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. I'm Erod and I'm the Blockbuster Buster, and welcome to a look back at Star Wars Animated. Our story begins in the late 70s. While Jaws was the first summer blockbuster, Star Wars was the first cinematic mega franchise, becoming a global brand in the course of just 1 year, and breaking box office records throughout the 80s. Inevitably, the brand would spread to other mediums, like toys, comics, and video games. Animation was just the next logical step in its evolution, but first, Christmas. The first official follow-up to Star Wars A New Hope was the highly divisive Star Wars Holiday Special. Yes, the one part of the franchise George Lucas would prefer would be forgotten or ignored. Whether you love or hate the Holiday Special, there is one segment that makes it worth seeing for all true blue Star Wars fans. And that is the animated one, also known as The Story of the Faithful Wookiee, written by Lucas himself and featuring the vocal talents of the original cast. Not only does this animated short work as an in-universe flashback, but it is also the official introduction of Boba Fett, voiced by the legendary Don Franks. Yes, the original Dr. Claw, the original Sabretooth, Cree Summer's father was the first person to ever play Boba Fett. But the most important aspect of this animated segment is that it officially began a long-term partnership between Lucasfilm and Nelvana, a small Canadian animation studio who just a few years later would find massive success with Care Bears. From the very beginning, Star Wars bread and butter was and forever will be the toys, and in the 80s, there was no better way to advertise a toy line than with an animated series. So Lucasfilm concocted a plan to produce animated shows that would air in between each of the Star Wars movies. Nelvana was the top choice for this endeavor, due to the great experience that Lucas had with them during the production of the Star Wars Holiday Special. But here's what would set the Star Wars cartoons apart from animated shows based on other franchises like DC and Marvel. The Star Wars cartoons were all canon, at least when they were first released. The plan was for these animated shows to take place before the original Star Wars trilogy, as not to disrupt any continuity, and the shows would focus on non-human characters to avoid paying the original cast likeness rights. ABC was so excited by the prospect of adding Star Wars to their channel that they greenlit not one, but 2 Star Wars shows that would air as a 1-hour block during their Saturday morning lineup. A block that would come to be known as the Ewoks and Droids Adventure Hour. And thus, let's begin with the most popular part of this block. The Misadventuring Droids. Early on, C-3PO and R2-D2 became the unofficial mascots of the franchise, as the second and third most recognizable Star Wars characters, right after Darth Vader. The droids hold the distinction of being the 2 characters that made the most appearances outside the movies throughout the 80s. So of course, they were the top choice to star in one of the first ever Star Wars cartoons. The production spared no expense. Animation duties were assigned to Korean animation studio Hong Ho Hyung Up Co. Stuart Copeland from The Police co-wrote and performed the theme song, In Trouble Again. Not only were the sound effects provided by the legendary Star Wars sound designer Ben Burtt, but he actually wrote some of the episodes. The cast included the talents of George Buza, Peter McNeil, Winston Record, Cree Summer, Don Franks reprising his role of Boba Fett from the Star Wars Holiday Special, as well as voicing a character called Kylo Ren that Disney really wants you to forget about. Ben Burtt, of course, provided the sound effects for R2-D2, and Anthony Daniels himself would reprise the role of C-3PO for the series, making him the only actor from the original trilogy to do so. Star Wars Droids premiered as part of the aforementioned Ewoks and Droids Adventure Hour on ABC on Saturday, September 7th, 1985. The animated block was preceded by, and I'm not making this up, a fitness special hosted by Tony Danza, which guest starred Mary Lou Retton and, you guessed it, C-3PO and R2-D2. I'm telling you, the droids were huge, and if you're in the mood for some corny nostalgia, the entire special is available right here on YouTube. The series takes place 15 years before the events of Star Wars A New Hope, as we see our favorite pair of mismatched droids bounce around the galaxy and inadvertently face off against gangsters, criminals, pirates, bounty hunters, and the Galactic Empire. In almost every episode, they end up under the employ of a new master, after becoming separated from Captain Antilles. Some feel that this is a continuity error, as in the original movie, C-3PO states that their last master was Antilles. This is explained away by the claim that during the cartoon, only Antilles was their official master, and all the people that they served after becoming separated from him, they did so via their own volition or for self-preservation, as opposed to loyalty. It is also implied that after the events of the cartoon, they were reunited with Antilles. Whatever happened to that guy? Oh. The show ran for 13 episodes and 1 hour-long special, called The Great Heap, where our reluctant heroes face off against an Abominor-class droid, named The Great Heap, who builds onto itself from the remains of other droids. And thus, the series came to an end on June 7th, 1986. So why was the show cancelled? Because of the one thing in the Star Wars universe that's more powerful than the Force: toys. The Droids toy line unfortunately did not sell well, and sales of the toy line based on the movies remained largely the same. So because the show wasn't fulfilling its main purpose, it was cancelled. There's actually a secondary reason for its cancellation, but I'll cover that in just a moment. The good news is that even though the show was cancelled in the United States, it would find new life across the pond, as the BBC bought the TV rights for the series and aired Droids reruns from 1986 all the way to 1991, even showing the 1 hour special The Great Heap as a 2-part presentation on the BBC's Going Live. Suffice it to say, while this show was short-lived, it did find its audience and it was loved. Now, let's talk about the other half of the Adventure Hour.
Freedom Fighters of the Forest.
While the Ewoks are among the most divisive characters in the franchise, the success of the made-for-TV movie Caravan of Courage on Ewok Adventure proved that they had more supporters than critics. And thus, not only was a second made-for-TV movie greenlit, aka The Battle for Endor, but ABC's second Star Wars animated show had to feature the merch-moving bears as the titular characters. So Star Wars Ewoks premiered alongside Droids on September 7th, 1985, as part of the Ewoks and Droids Adventure Hour. Like Droids, Ewoks also featured an all-star cast, which included George Buza, Chris Summer, Don Franks, and Jim Henshaw, as the most famous Ewok of all, Wicket, who was renamed in the series as Wicket W. Warwick, presumably after the actor who plays him in the movies, Warwick Davis. However, while a lot of effort and quality went into Droids, the same cannot be said for Ewoks. While everybody assumed that the Space Bears and Nelvana were a match made in heaven, as it turns out, the house that Care Bears built couldn't work the same kind of magic for the Star Wars IP. While Ewoks is not horrible, it's also a very unremarkable generic 80s cartoon, with the occasional decent episode. Hell, there are even some who question whether or not the show is actually canon. As in the cartoon, Ewoks speak Basic, aka English. Now, our ability to understand these primitive bears without a protocol droid could easily be explained away as an audience convenience, but this is still a sound argument. And now for the million-dollar question. If Ewoks wasn't as good as Droids, how come it was renewed for a second season and Droids wasn't? Like Droids, Ewoks also failed to move large quantities of its tie-in merch, and it failed to affect the sales of the toys based on the movies. Furthermore, each 1 hour block of Ewoks and Droids cost between $500,000 to $600,000 to produce. and none of the parties involved wanted to continue paying for a couple of shows that were not serving their function. But here's the twist. While both shows failed to move merchandise, they both got excellent ratings. So much so that ABC was still interested in buying another 13 half hours. At this point, Lucasfilm just needed to get a return on their investment, so they favored practicality rather than quality. And thus, the second reason why Droids was cancelled was because it was the more expensive of the two shows. Furthermore, to reduce production costs for Ewoks Season 2, the production was moved from Toronto to San Francisco. Because of the production move, the entire cast was replaced, which many agree was one of the highlights of Season 1. Now, I don't mean to throw the Season 2 cast under the bus. In the end, their only real flaw is that they were not the originals. And thus, the show was retitled The All-New Ewoks, and it premiered on ABC on Saturday, September 13th, 1986. And the show went from okay to oh boy. There's no way of sugarcoating it. The All-New Ewoks was just bad. The stories were shortened from 20-minute adventures with a beginning, middle, and end to 11-minute shorts that were lighthearted, condescending, and just flat out lame. Basically, Star Wars, the biggest and most successful franchise of the era, ripped off the Smurfs, but without any of the charm or the magic. Furthermore, Batman the Animated Series writer and Harley Quinn creator Paul Dini used to write for this show. And it was so bad that he honestly considered quitting animation. Thank God he didn't. And thus, after fulfilling their 13-episode commitment, the all-new Ewoks quietly and mercifully was cancelled. And so, Star Wars Animated vanished from our TV screens for almost 2 decades. And even though the prequel trilogy divided the fanbase, it would also bring with it a new hope.